The Roman Empire, 14 AD, 180 AD. Incitatus. Around 40 AD, a peculiar event occurred in the history of the Roman Empire. It was at that time that Caligula, the third of the emperors of Rome, a descendant of both Julius Caesar and Caesar Augustus, and a young man who had succeeded as emperor in 37 AD when he was just 14 years old, decided that he was going to make a certain Incitatus one of the two consuls of Rome for a year. The republican magistracies like consul, tribune, and quaestor were all still functioning offices under the empire and continued to be positions of considerable esteem, ones which were prized by the old senatorial families of Rome. That made Caligula's decision to make Incitatus a consul especially troubling for many. You see, Incitatus was Caligula's horse. For obvious reasons, the Roman elite did not look favorably at this decision, viewing it as an insult to the office of consul and the traditions of Rome. Thankfully, Caligula soon backtracked on this decision, but it was just one sign of his generally tyrannical behaviour, and not long afterwards the Praetorian Guard, the imperial bodyguard within the city, murdered the emperor and placed his cousin, the middle-aged Claudius, on the throne. This entire incident was symptomatic of the wider history of the Roman Empire, a time of questionable emperors, murderous imperial bodyguards, and cutthroat politics. Here we explore the history of the Roman Empire in the 1st and 2nd centuries AD. Suetonius, Tacitus, and the Cursus Honorum. Any assessment of the emperors of this time has to take into account the inherent biases found in the main sources of their reigns. For the era between the age of Caesar Augustus down to the end of the Flavian dynasty, over a century later, we are broadly reliant on two ancient historians, Suetonius and Tacitus. Suetonius was a secretary in the imperial government at Rome, who in the early 2nd century AD wrote a book entitled The Lives of the 12 Caesars, a series of 12 biographies of the first 12 rulers of Rome, from Julius Caesar and Caesar Augustus down to Domitian. Tacitus was a Roman senator and a contemporary of Suetonius who composed two different works, the Histories and the Annals, which provided lengthy histories of the Julio-Claudian dynasty, founded by Caesar and Augustus, and the Flavian dynasty that followed. However, it is now widely appreciated that these two works have to be approached carefully. As valuable as their accounts are, both men were biased against the emperors. In particular, if a Roman emperor was perceived to have not displayed sufficient respect for the Roman senatorial class and their desire to progress through the cursus honorum, the course of honors whereby they were appointed to positions like tribune, consul, and then governor of a Roman province, then Suetonius and Tacitus were liable to depict them in an unfavorable light. For instance, it's usually agreed that Caligula was indeed unhinged, but scholars in recent decades have become less accepting of the negative depictions of emperors like Tiberius and Nero found in the writings of Suetonius and Tacitus. The Julio-Claudian emperors. Caesar Augustus died in 14 AD after what would turn out to be the longest reign in the history of the Roman Empire. He did not have a biological son to succeed him, but his extended family would provide heirs over the next half a century. All 4 emperors followed in the Julio-Claudian dynasty he founded. The first of these was Tiberius, Augustus's stepson, who ascended in 14 AD and ruled down to 37 AD. He was followed by the deranged Caligula, who only ruled for 4 years before he was murdered. His replacement, Claudius, ruled down to 54 AD before he died, perhaps under suspicious circumstances surrounding the consumption of poisonous mushrooms. The 5th and final Julio-Claudian ruler was Nero, who then reigned until 68 AD. Generally, all four of these rulers were presented in a negative light by Suetonius and Tacitus. Tiberius was seen as being aloof and spending much of his time absent from Rome, leaving the head of the Praetorian Guard, Sejanus, to exercise excessive power in Rome in his absence. Caligula was guilty of worse than simply trying to make his horse a consul. Claudius was evidently the best of the Julio-Claudian emperors after Augustus, though he had a disability, something which led Roman observers to portray him in a negative light in a time when such things were not viewed with sympathy. Finally, Nero was said to have been a tyrant who famously fiddled while Rome burnt during the Great Fire that destroyed much of the city in 64 AD. However, many historians now believe that the depiction of Nero in particular is not accurate, and that he was much more well-liked in his own time than Suetonius and Tacitus suggest. The year of the four emperors and the Flavian dynasty. In 68 AD, a crisis struck the Roman Empire. 2 years earlier, a massive rebellion had broken out amongst the Jewish subjects of Rome in the province of Judea. The first Jewish revolt had caused major unrest as it dragged on for years, and in 68 AD, several provincial governors in Gaul and Hispania decided to revolt against the rule of Emperor Nero. The first civil war of the imperial era followed. It is usually referred to as the Year of the Four Emperors. In the course of it, Nero was quickly overthrown by a rival, Galba, who was then himself overthrown by Otho in early 69 AD. A further rival, Vitellius, defeated Otho 3 months later before he was in turn defeated by Vespasian, the general who had been sent east to quell the Jewish revolt, and who as a result had several legions under his command when the civil war broke out. Thus, there were 4 emperors in the year 69 AD: Galba, Otho, Vitellius, and Vespasian. Vespasian managed to secure his position in the long term and founded a new ruling family, the Flavian dynasty, so named as he hailed from the gens Flavia. He himself ruled down to 79 AD. He was followed by his son Titus, who was a popular ruler, though short-lived. When he died relatively young in 81 AD, he was succeeded by his brother Domitian. Domitian was a paradoxical figure, one who ruled for 15 years, quite successfully in many ways, but who eventually fell prey to the same problem as the Julio-Claudians. He failed to honor the Roman senatorial classes and was killed in a palace coup in 96 AD. The Flavians are perhaps best known today for building the Flavian amphitheater in Rome, what we know 2 millennia later as the Colosseum. The 5 Good Emperors. Just hours after Domitian was murdered in 96 AD, the Senate convened in Rome and elected one of their own to become Emperor of Rome, a man named Nerva. It was the first time a Roman emperor was elected in this manner, and it established a pattern whereby Roman emperors were selected on merit rather than exclusively on bloodlines. Nerva adopted his successor, a Roman senator and commander named Trajan, who in turn adopted a second cousin as his successor, Hadrian. 2 other emperors followed, Antoninus Pius and Marcus Aurelius, the latter known for his famous Meditations, a treatise on Stoic philosophy. These 5 rulers would rule between 96 AD and 180 AD and are usually termed the 5 Good Emperors. They were liked by the senatorial classes and are generally viewed as bringing peace and prosperity to Rome. Consolidating the empire. What most of these emperors, be they Julio-Claudian, Flavian, or otherwise, had in common was that they were working to consolidate the Roman Empire rather than expand it. On his death, Caesar Augustus had left instructions that his successors should not try to expand the empire further, but should instead strengthen its borders at natural defensive points, specifically the Sahara Desert in the south, the Syrian Desert in the east, and the rivers Rhine and Danube in the north. Most of his successors followed his advice. Claudius was unusual in that he invaded Britain and began a gradual conquest of what are now England and Wales. Beyond this, the only major conquests were undertaken by Trajan. He conquered the kingdom of Dacia in what is now Romania, annexed the Nabatean kingdom in Jordan, Sinai, and northwestern Arabia, and even invaded and occupied the Parthian Empire in Mesopotamia and Persia, though the latter conquests were quickly abandoned by Hadrian. The result was a more streamlined empire, one with a massive series of fortifications across Europe along the natural defensive points of the rivers Rhine and Danube. Life in the Roman Empire. As a result of this strategy of consolidation, a period of peace known as the Pax Romana, the Roman peace, ensued. It contributed to the stability and prosperity of life in the Roman Empire. This was one of the best times to be alive in pre-modern times, at least if you were a free person. At least 20% of the population of the empire were slaves. For those who were free, trade flourished, commerce prevailed, and there was a wide range of entertainment and culture to avail of. This was also one of the most urbanized societies of pre-modern times, with around 20% of people living in cities and towns. Excellent roads allowed for swift travel between cities, and the aqueducts delivered clean water to fountains dotted around the cities. All in all, historians estimate that living standards in the Roman Empire were as high as they were in Europe in the 18th century at the dawn of the Industrial Revolution. There was also a vibrant culture, one in which Roman writers like the satirists Martial and Juvenal worked in Rome alongside writers, dramatists, and historians like Tacitus, Suetonius, Lucan, Seneca, Josephus, and Pliny the Elder. Romans might have had to deal with tyrannical rulers from time to time, but for many people, life was good. The Gathering Storm. While life was good in the Roman Empire in the 1st and 2nd centuries AD, there was a gathering storm. Already during the reigns of rulers like Trajan, there was a growing fiscal crisis as the state began devaluing the silver coinage to make ends meet, leading to a spike in inflation. There were also an escalating series of threats to the borders. Marcus Aurelius had spent much of his reign fighting the Marcomannic Wars. Unlike so many other wars that Rome had fought in recent centuries, these were not wars of conquest, but of defense. The Marcomanni were a Germanic people in alliance with the Sarmatians and Quadi, who had breached the northern border around what is now Austria, Czechia, and Hungary. While Aurelius fought off and defeated the Marcomanni and their allies, it was a worrying sign of Rome's growing vulnerability. Finally, the Praetorian Guard and legions had all demonstrated as early as the reign of Caligula that if pushed, they could overthrow any emperor, and that ambitious generals could claim the imperial title if they really wanted. These three issues, hyperinflation, the invasions of the northern borders by Germanic and Asiatic tribes, and civil wars caused by ambitious generals and legions, would soon see Rome spiral into crisis and decline. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like and subscribe. Let us know your thoughts in the comments. That's it for now. See you in the next one.